Thank you very much for being here, for joining us for today's really important event. You see the title, it's a long title. It's Mobilizing Non-State Actors Ahead of COP15. And that is sending a clear message. We have to be there. We have to support COP15. We have to show our commitment with what we are expecting. It must be a strong global biodiversity framework. And also the idea it is to secure a climate neutral and nation positive world. Because we won't be effective if we are not able to address the intertwined crisis in between climate and nature. And also we know that we could be more effective if we can put together both objectives, if we can create a convergence approach as a way to facilitate actions that can implement our objective toward a net zero, carbon neutral, and nature positive world. So for today, we will have two segments. I will be in charge of moderating the first one, and then Marco Lambertini will be in charge of the second one. So for the first segment, what we will have, it is first a presentation of a pre-recorded message by Chris Coulter, CEO of GlobeScan, of the result of the report Navigating the Nature Agenda. So could we go with the video?
Hello, I'm Chris Coulter, the CEO of GlobeScan. We're an insights and strategy firm, and I'm thrilled to be speaking to you today at COP27, and I will share with you some recent research findings we've done at GlobeScan on this nature agenda. So I will draw from a few different sources of research. One is our global consumer study called Healthy and Sustainable Living, and that's a long-term 20-year, 30-country study we've been doing. And then we'll look more deeply at a very special project we did called the Nature Agenda, where we focused on consumer research, but also we spoke to 400 very influential expert stakeholders in May, and I will share their perspectives in the conversation. So first of all, we find ourselves in a very unique moment in the evolution of sustainability, where we have significant levels of societal engagement and concern on both the climate agenda and the nature agenda. And you can see from this long-term tracking of general public perceptions across the world, from 2003 to 2022 and July 2022, in fact, we see that there is a growing thrust in the last 8 years of concern and a sense of seriousness of both the climate agenda and the loss and the biodiversity agenda. And where historically we've seen similar levels of engagement, a lot more volatility in the past, where other issues have crowded out that sort of concern and engagement from people across the world. And what's unique in this moment, in the last number of years in particular, we have, throughout the pandemic, through this acute cost of living crisis, and through the war in Ukraine, we have maintained collectively ongoing concern and engagement around climate and biodiversity loss. And this is significant because historically there was always a diminishment of some of those concerns when other issues overcame. But we're in a different moment right now in the history of sustainable development that's important to capture, and perfectly timed for COP27 and COP15 in Montreal. So what about expert viewpoints? How do they understand the barriers and opportunities for the nature agenda? Well, we asked them to shape in their own words the biggest barriers we have when it comes to protecting nature broadly. There are a number of key different thematics that came out of the verbatims that experts shared with us. One is this overall sense of we need to stoke public awareness and interest and engagement on how specifically we all impact nature. That's a fundamental public awareness campaign style in engaging people at scale. Secondly, we have to find different ways of dealing with the imperative of economic growth and our approach to growth, and decoupling growth from nature impacts, and circularity plays a key role into that, but other elements are fundamental. And then thirdly, the third largest barrier was viewed as lack of political will and government enforcement to ensure that nature is protected and respected. So those are the fundamental big building blocks that experts point to on our need. When we asked around priorities, and these are the elements with the greatest affinity for, so you can see stakeholders across the world saying, yes, companies need to take much more integrated approaches to nature, including their climate and social strategies, and 84% of experts strongly agree with that proposition. 83% of experts strongly agree that biodiversity should be addressed with the same urgency and resources as climate change, sort of a leveling up of the nature agenda with the climate agenda historically. And also experts point to the fact that it's really fundamental to involve and include indigenous peoples and local communities in our nature strategy, that nature is really critical for the just transition conversation that's paramount in Egypt this week, and also that nature-based solutions are fundamental and legitimate parts of corporate approaches to sustainability going forward. When it comes to leadership and where stakeholders are pointing responsibility and accountability, we see that at the very high end, we have national governments, multi-sector partnerships in the private sector being viewed as the most responsible actors, constituencies to drive the nature agenda forward, and governments have an opportunity to do something very dramatic in Montreal at COP15, and the private sector also is viewed as an important player. And this multi-sector partnership and this thematic of collaboration that comes through all of our research recently reinforces the opportunity for us to find different mechanisms to move most of us collectively in one direction. And when it comes to perceived performance so far on nature protection, we can see an upside down viewpoint here. So now the private sector and governments are viewed significantly as poor performers when it comes to nature protection, -54 net rating for the private sector and -48 net rating on performance for governments. Again, there's opportunities for both the business sector and government sector to establish new commitments and new approaches, both at COP27 and COP15. And at the positive end, we see that stakeholders are pointing to indigenous communities and NGOs as being especially effective when it comes to their performance on nature. So it's a very diffuse sense of accountability and performance levels thus far. If we look more specifically at the private sector, stakeholders are pointing to agriculture, food and beverage as the sector that needs the most improvement, followed by energy, mining, and then the banking sector. The banking sector is viewed as a particularly important sector according to North American stakeholders. And then if we look to what some verbatims from these esteemed experts point to, we can see some important thematics that they're looking at for the role of business going forward, especially in the post-2020 framework for the CBD, where this notion of embedding the cost of biodiversity into operational decision makings is fundamental, and that our supply chain is a place of important focus for us to ensure that biodiversity is being protected and conserved. That we also see this idea of regulatory and voluntary initiatives both need to be in play, and that we need to determine and understand more clearly the cost and value of nature through business decisions, and that we also need to find ways to make sure nature shows up clearly in corporate strategy and in central pillars of our operations, that these are important elements for us to take forward to be stronger performers when it comes to nature. So at a summative level, in all of our recent work, we can point to 6 key points. One is that there is clarity among all of the research and data that both consumers and stakeholders value nature and are deeply concerned about the current state and see that there's a need for leadership and urgency and action on nature. There's also a thematic of integration that's really fundamental according to stakeholders in particular, that we need to find ways to integrate nature, climate, and social issues among governments and business priorities. There's a real thrust and an opportunity for us to collaborate more effectively and to advocate for the types of shifts in systemic changes that are required to drive progress at scale. We also see that consumers are curious and engaged and ready to be moved by brands and NGOs and governments on the nature agenda. There's a real thirst to be a part of that conversation, which is exciting. Fifth, we have to find ways to embed further the value of nature into business. We need to find ways that we can create stronger impact in this post-2020 framework, and that's an urgent priority. And importantly, we must, and it's indispensable that we find ways to create space and collaboration and respect for indigenous peoples and local communities as key partners in protecting nature and valuing nature because of their instrumental role in doing so and their strong credentials in being able to lead that process. I hope that was useful. Thank you very much, and wishing you all a wonderful rest of the COP.
Thank you very much, Chris. Fantastic. I think that there are many, many messages behind what we have just seen. And look, friends, we will have a plan B for this panel because we are still waiting two of our panelists. So we will switch a bit what we had planned this would be. So first I would like to invite Patrick Frick, CEO of Global Common Alliance, to come with me, and we will do this. This will be a collective fireside chat that will include you all, okay? And I will put you on the spot by giving you the mic to asking to you, what is your first reaction based on what you have just seen? Do you want to start? What you are feeling? Because yeah. No problem. What is your first reaction based in this globe scan information?
I don't know. I'm just happy to be here and seeing that biodiversity is on the top of it's kind of on the top of the agenda and being mentioned as part of climate change. I think they're both interrelated, and I like that in the other presentation that we saw, we could see that there was a interest across the years that we're scaling up. So it's good to see it across the years, and now at COP that it's being integrated.
Thank you so much. You remember that in one of the slides appeared that we are losing nature probably because of lack of awareness and the economy over nature. So that is giving us two messages. We have not been fully able to convince people of the importance of nature despite of our efforts. And second, we have a strong disconnection in between the economy and nature, something that we have to revert, because we do need to create a narrative that can build that link in relation to nature and the economy. What is your feeling, Jordi?
I thought also at the end the point was very interesting about the importance of indigenous peoples and local communities, even from the perspective of business, because we know how important they are in helping to conserve nature, and how business often doesn't work in a very respectful way with those communities. So to think much more about how those communities can be part of the work with businesses.
Thank you. And it is true that net performance, it is identifying indigenous communities and NGOs. And it is interesting because it has been fully confirmed that deforestation is happening less in indigenous territories first, in protected areas second. That is happening in the Amazon, and that is happening in tropical forests around the world. So it is true. Indigenous peoples, organizations, and NGOs are more effective in defining ways to protect nature. So, to you, Patricia, what do you think about this survey?
I think it's great to see that we are recognizing the fantastic job that local communities and indigenous people make at managing their own lands and embracing nature restoration, nature conservation as part of their lives, as part of their vision, as part of their cosmovision of the world. And I love the fact that we're now starting to recognize that. What I would love to see, and from the graphs that Chris showed, what I would love to see is a start pushing more of that government, private sector push-up of that concept, so we can actually make that more effective while we're mobilizing and continuing to strengthen communities and community management.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay, so now to you, Patrick. What are your first reactions and feedback of this a survey of GlobeScan.
Immediate. So I'm generally more positive about the future. So I want to highlight the positive things, and then I think Patricia said in the last session, let's be very specific, right? So I think that's good news. Awareness is raising. The other point that was very clear is how important the role of companies is. And so the good news is that this collaboration here for the Nature Positive Zone, over 80 partners with the Global Commons Alliance have done work for 3 years now to do the following. Number one, next year, 2023 is going to be big. Number one, the Earth Commission, we've incubated the Earth Commission, is providing the first quantitative scientific framework that integrates nature, climate, and people. It can give us, it's a gift for the integration conversation. Second, science-based targets. We will have a version 1 of science-based targets for nature coming out early next year, complementing the science-based targets for climate, which means we're going to get serious about what it means for a company to be within bounds of nature, climate, and justice. That's very good. Third, we need more investment on the cities, but that's going to happen. We just got some resources, although follow quickly, and integration with TNFT happens as we speak. Version 0.3 points to Science-Based Targets Network throughout. So that will be the link to the investors. But that's really good news. I think the third piece of good news, so if you think of the first one, the holistic mindset, that change of mindset is critical. The second is change action, is that we're not just coming out with the science-based targets for all Earth systems, but we're launching the accountability accelerator at Montreal COP15. Why is it important? Because of course voluntary action, even if it's science-based and people, corporations say this is what I do, we gotta create the incentives, or for those that don't act, it's going to be painful. And that's what I'm optimistic about, that actually funders putting money in to start fixing the gaps in the accountability system. So those are two good news based on a groundswell of understanding how we have to take a whole Earth approach.
Thank you, Patrick. And it is interesting what you are saying, because that means that we have to build a bottom-up process. But one of the graphics is showing that people identify, or corporations, institutions, as the main responsible, the governments. That is correct. It is just responsibility of government. How can we strengthen the role of non-state actors into the CBD as a way to have a good GBF, and also to have a better future process for the Biodiversity Convention?
I mean, we're using with the climate champions and as our partners here, kind of the ambition loop thinking. So what we're trying to do is get mass commitment, or get a lot of commitment from private initiatives. So non-state actors, companies, etc. And if we can get them to commit to the ambition that we need, and it's science-based, we know it's good enough, we hope that will make it easier for governments to follow suit. So lift the ceiling, it's easier to lift the floor. But I think and second, the accountability is so important, because we gotta get involvement bottom up. We gotta have grassroots movements, folks on the streets, start to put pressure on those government leaders that don't move. So I think it's both. It's leading with companies, investors, etc. This is what we're going to do, but never let go of the pressure that comes from civil society, because otherwise I think it will not happen.
But we are in a chicken-egg dilemma. So I feel that many actors are not assuming the add value of having non-state actors into the CBD process, because there is lack of a clear vision of the CBD process. So we don't have the actors because we don't have the vision. We are not building the vision because we don't have the actors pushing. How can we break that chicken-egg dilemma? And how can we convince business sector come in? Because there is some add value of working together with a convention, by having champions, by developing tools all together, as it has happened, as it is happening here. This is showing how effective an action agenda could be. But why there is not a sense of usefulness of that agenda in the CBD?
I can't answer that question because I think it's not understandable. I just tell you, Manuel, that I get a very different sense because when we're talking with companies, investors, for them it's almost like it becomes critical to their enterprise. So I'm not diminishing the CBD. We need a successful CBD to send a signal, but I feel there is a lot of movement from non-state actors and private sector that I think will only increase as the risk that we're facing due to this crisis is more and more felt. So my answer is, I think there's a groundswell, but I can't answer the other question on it.
And look, friends, let me share with you a bit of the history of the Action Agenda. When we started the Action Agenda for Climate in Lima in 2014, with the Lima Paris Action Agenda, there were a strong push, a strong connection, a strong pressure from the business sector to be part of this debate. So when we decided, okay, let's organize the first time ever Action Day, it was in Lima, then we launched the Lima Paris Action Agenda that then evolved into the Marrakesh Partnership, and now we are in the Marrakesh Partnership 2.0. And it was the business sector who was pushing toward an action agenda in the climate debate. But if you ask, even here, how much do you know about the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming action agenda that was adopted here in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2018? Probably not too many people knows about that agenda. And probably not too many people know that we should build upon that statement of 2018 to move the agenda towards being strengthened because of champions, because of some mechanism to report, because of bringing more science-based target and those kind of things. So my feeling it is that we are in the opposite scenario. In climate, there were a lot of pressure. Okay. Here, I don't think that people can identify the add value.
But on the other hand, Business for Nature, I mean, they rallied 1,000 businesses to sign on or make disclosure mandatory. And I just heard from my colleagues, Mark Goff and Eva Zabi, they have signed up 500 businesses coming to Montreal. So I think there's a massive concerted effort on trying to business to Montreal. Maybe not as it was in Paris, but I feel quite good about that kind of momentum orchestrated by Business for Nature.
And Patrick, what about lack of public awareness? Do you agree that that could be one of the reasons because we are a losing nation?
Absolutely. I mean, pressure needs to come from the people. There's no other way. But I'm hopeful on that agenda too. You know why? I think CO2 is hard to to touch, and what we're sensing here with the effort with the Nature's Newsroom and all our efforts in terms of working with media partners, we're getting a lot of traction and demand actually from listeners to have more nature news, which I think has to do also that nature somewhat feels more direct, right? Your drinking water being toxic, that's an issue, and you know it when it is toxic. Your environment being degraded, where you live, you know, no greenery, you can see it. So I actually optimistic that the nature agenda might have a lot more momentum in that sense.
Thank you. And last point with you, Patrick. Some years ago, a global commission for climate and the economy was created. And that global commission was so effective in developing a good narrative that strongly connected climate with the economy. The commission, it has just been closed some days ago because by now everybody understands well that when we think about climate, it is about the economy. Do we need something similar to connect nature and the economy? Do we need a global commission that can dynamize or that can develop that narrative as a way to move things forward?
I think that would be great. Any effort on that front, I'm fully supportive. And I think it's going hand in hand with translation of what the private sector needs to do. What's expected from the economy to stay not just going to net zero, but nature positive. And I think both things in parallel would be amazing.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome, Kobe Brand, Global Coordination for Biodiversity from ICLEI. Thank you for joining us. And Kobe, let me ask you, how much committed are cities to address biodiversity loss and to be an active actor in the implementation, not only in the implementation, in achieving a strong GBF in Montreal, and then to implement it?
So I would firstly say thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you on this Nature Day, this historic Nature Day at COP27. And I would dare to say, cities are ready and cities are leading the way in many ways in terms of ambition and action and implementation. We are geared up. We are so prepared for COP15. The fact that so many of these cities here have been speaking about nature as part of the climate solution, I think is an indication that finally, I think, worldwide, the penny is dropping very quickly. There cannot be a climate solution for this world without a nature positive solution that goes with it. And where does action happen most? At the local level. ICLEI proudly coined the phrase, local actions for global change. And that was ahead of the Rio Convention in 1990. We went with that slogan to the Rio Convention in 1992. What a long way we've come, but it's still as true as then, as ever. Local action is needed for global change. So cities are where things get implemented. Cities are where the change and the incubation happen, sometimes where national governments can't. And we have all seen in even our most recent and current history that sometimes national governments are working more slowly or are prohibited by whatever reasons to move forward for climate, for biodiversity. But cities never stop, because our citizens never stop, and our citizens elect and knock on the mayor's doors and say, we want change. So we realize also through the COVID-19 pandemic that humanity, and especially people in dense urban environments, need nature. They cannot survive without nature. Depression, all sorts of things skyrocketed through the COVID-19 worst days of lockdowns. And why? Partly at least, and this is not me saying this is the medical society telling us, partly because we were deprived of getting out of our apartments, walking in our parks, experiencing nature, touching, feeling, smelling nature all around us. And I think, just coming back to your question, we are ready. We are going to have a pavilion like we have here, the local and subnational constituency pavilion together with Scotland. We will have a similar pavilion for the 2 weeks at COP15. A full packed program for the 2 weeks for the first time ever at a COP, Biodiversity COP, and we will have a very high level summit to which we welcome the whole of civil society. All of your voices count, because cities are you and you are cities. We live in cities. Let's make them livable. The main thing that we're going to try and achieve at COP15, and all the stars are aligned, is to get a big decision through for a new climate for a new framework decision on a next 10-year plan of action, building on the Nagoya 10-year plan of action for cities and subnational governments. And this is driven by the Edinburgh process, together with the UK government, Scottish government, UK government, the Committee of Regions of Europe, Sao Paulo state. So many national governments are supporting it, so many cities around the world. And I'll end off just by saying quickly that we have a broad platform. Many of you are partners of that broad platform. It's called Cities with Nature. And in that broad platform, cities unite with their partners, with their networks, with other organizations. WWF is part of this as well. We come together there so that cities can directly learn from each other, inspire each other, leapfrog, and get to that scaled action which is needed. We are now at around 250 cities that have signed up to it. We hope there will be thousands more that sign up to Cities with Nature. So we're ready. We're excited.
Excellent. Thank you, Kobe. And let me add one more question. I think that it was yesterday that we moved into being 8 billion people in this planet. So sometimes cities are growing against nature places. So how can we address that big threat that we are putting to biodiversity because of a growing population and growing cities?
I live in Africa. I live in South Africa. And Africa is urbanizing more rapidly than any other continent on this planet. Asia, yes, as well, just a step behind. But in Africa, we see cities expanding, doubling in size in a decade or less. And most of that development is informal. Some cities have 60, 70, 80% of their development as informal settlements or slums. And we need to understand that informality altogether and the economy that underpins that informality is not going to go away. So we need to find solutions for the millions, the 2 billion people who are projected to come and live on planet Earth alongside us in our lifetimes before 2050. We need to make room for them. They are probably going to live in cities. Some cities, some big cities are maybe not going to expand that rapidly. But some small cities are not even villages today, and they are going to become the mega cities of tomorrow. Much of that is going to happen on our continent. And yes, we must change the notion of driving nature out when we shape and plan and reimagine our cities. We need to have a clear vision of our cities where nature isn't an add-on or an afterthought or something you push out, but where actually we learn lessons from Singapore and places like that. Singapore talks of themselves as a city in a garden, and that garden is respected and revered by everybody who lives and visits Singapore. I'm not saying every city needs to be a smart city like Singapore. That is perhaps not doable. But what we certainly can do is embrace nature, bring big parks, brick open spaces, connected urban corridors, protected areas, bring them, make them part of the solution. And we can address so many climate change solutions, human population solutions, basic services, gender issues, leaving no one behind, no place behind, through nature. Bringing nature back, we have studies that indicate when we bring parks into cities, protected areas into cities, crime goes down, the population thrives. So yes, we have problems, we sometimes drive habitat out, but we need to change that, and we advocate for that.
Thank you, Kobe. And now let me welcome Lucy Mulenkei, ED of the Indigenous Information Network. And thank you for joining us. I know how busy everybody is. But let me ask you, Lucy, in one of the slides that we saw in the beginning of today's event, we saw that people is identifying the important role of IPLCs in protecting nature. So what should we learn from indigenous peoples in a time in which we are thinking that we have to move our actions towards being nature positive? So what are those suggestions, those lessons that we have to take from indigenous people to really move towards a nature positive time?
Thank you very much, and my apologies for coming late. We were in another event, and I'm glad that been able to get you. I think when we look at indigenous people, being like one of them who have grown up in the community, nature is part of us. Biodiversity is part of us. We are also part of it. and we look at nature holistically. And if you talk about nature-based solutions and nature-based activities wherever they were there from time immemorial. And I think it's a high time, and science has already recognized it, because ICBES, with their research, they have also come up with that, the fact that indigenous peoples' areas are protected and most of the biodiversity is found there. That is already good evidence to be able to tell the question that you have already asked me. And what I think the world has to learn from indigenous people is to look at how much they have protected their areas. How much have they conserved whatever they've been conserved? When an indigenous person stands in the middle of a forest, they don't destroy it, but rather they look at what they want. If it's medicinal plants, they know what to harvest and what not to harvest. They know what to leave away and what, and for example, even simple things like even wood, they never cut live wood, they carry the dead wood. That's when they carry it to go and use it. So it's something that we already know, that they believe and they see, and they look at nature as part and parcel of them. So to me, I think it's very important for everyone to be able to look at nature as something that is already in there and belongs to us and makes us live, and we have to keep it for the future generation. We just don't destroy it for scientific or for any other needs of private, but we have to look at it and see we have a generation, we have a future to be able to share that in the future. And if we don't protect it now, conserve it now, then it means there is no future. And if we continue doing what we are doing to the earth today, to the different ecosystems, forests and others, then we are going to be even more painful, because it's going to be more painful because our grandchildren will not, grandchildren will not even have, and will not be talking here like Manuel and say, what do we do? It was destroyed by our fathers, our relatives, our you know. So we really have to look and embrace it and look at it and say, indigenous people have done it. How have they done it? How can traditional knowledge that indigenous people have work with science to make it a success, to bring back what has been lost and bring it back to where it is? And that's why we are discussing all this, and we've never stepped aside in discussing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, because we know that's where we have to make the governments, we have to make every stakeholders understand us and be able to look at that instrument as a tool that can be able to help the world understand that biodiversity is critical and very important for all our lives. So we've been participating throughout and will not stop it until when it's already passed, and then the implementation process comes, and we need all of you, we need all each other to be able to work to make it a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So we are running a bit out of time because we will have a second segment. So I would like to ask you to join me with a big applause to our great panelists. And then we will see a video from a call to action from Ahmad Al-Hendawi, CEO of the World Organization of the Scout Movement. And after that, Marco Lambertini will moderate the second segment. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, two reports came out this week providing a dual reminder of our responsibility. First, we have just heard from WWF's Living Planet report that we're witnessing an average decline of 69% in species population since 1970. And the second report, we just learned from the United Nations that the world's population, which has been growing, is projected to reach 8 billion this month and continue to increase to 8.5 billion by 2030. This planet needs to be shared with respect to all species if we want to have a healthy and sustainable future for all. We know that nature-based solutions are a significant part of the answer. They can provide mitigation needed to achieve the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement. Yet, the financing gap in annual investment in climate mitigation means an even larger gap for nature-based solutions. At this point, we know we cannot rely entirely only on top-down approaches through global frameworks and country commitments. We truly need to look at all solutions in front of us. The commitment of young people is what should give us hope. Just look around you at the COP27 and feel the energy and commitment of young people there. In the Scout movement, we comprise of over 57 million members around the world, and nature is our classroom. Scouts and other youth organizations enable young people to care for the environment and to empathize with nature from a young age, so they can grow up thinking about how to make it better. My call to action today is simple. We need more investment in nature-based solutions, especially in grassroots initiatives led by young people and local communities. As for the COP itself, when the ship is sinking, the blame game of pointing fingers, the stinginess and short-sighted definition of national interests, and the lack of leadership to get the job done will leave us all in the water without a life vest. Let's call it what it is. Not acting when the ship is sinking should not be called difficult negotiation, but simply an act of recklessness. So let's not gamble with our future. We can do better at this COP, and we must do better at the CBD COP in Montreal. Thank you.
Brilliant. So welcome again, everybody. We are entering the second part of the event. My name is Marco Lambertini. I'm heading WWF International. I'm going to be joined very soon by another incredible set of guests, and we'll hear from them. Let me just introduce this second session with a brief reflection. And it is that we are on one hand truly living a paradox. Because on one hand, the data, the figures, the trends about the health of the planet are, and I'm going to use a word that is tough, but I can't think of anything else, are terrifying. And we're beginning to understand increasingly not just the impact we are having on the planet, but the consequences that the impact is having on our lives. And that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, which is much more exciting, is that, as we heard in the first part, the Globscan report, the comments from some of the speakers, and we'll hear again from other members of society, actually society is beginning to get it, is beginning to understand all this, is beginning to be concerned, not just sad about nature loss. And we're really thinking of our action today and the impact this will have on our children, on their children, on future generations as well. It's a massive cultural shift where nature conservation is not any longer something nice to do, but actually fundamentally is essential for a safe future for us, let alone the pandas, the elephants, tunas and tigers that we all love, for us. That's a massive cultural change after decades, centuries of taking nature for granted, getting, taking, without thinking of the consequences. So the readiness of society for change vis-a-vis nature, as well, including, of course, the climate agenda, has never been higher. I've been in conservation a long time, and I have to tell you, I'm so excited about that, because I see society beginning to really wanting to embrace change. We heard Globscan, we heard the cities, we heard the youth. That readiness is growing. In Montreal next month, we have to capitalize on that readiness, and the leaders will have to respond and listen to society and commit to a plan that allows society to embrace that transition. And today, we're going to particularly put the emphasis on civil society. We are super excited because we have now a call to action for nature signed by over 350 civil society groups. What is exciting is not just the number, but actually is the diversity of these groups. We have environmental, humanitarian, development, youth, faith-based, women-based, right-based, indigenous people, everything. And that shows another important thing that has happened quite recently, the convergence of all these agendas towards nature conservation as the foundation for everything else. That's what makes me excited vis-a-vis the terrible and terrifying trends that we're still unfortunately experiencing in terms of state of the planet and pressures from our own activities. So that's my introductory reflection. Let me just now call upon our wonderful guests. First of all, Patricia, can you please join? Patricia Zurita is the CEO of BirdLife International. It's the largest network of grassroots environmental conservation organizations. Tina, please join me on stage. Miralini Tia Rai is actually the Executive Director of Women for Biodiversity, and we'll hear about the importance of the gender agenda in the biodiversity discourse. We have Alexandra Mazzacco, which is here with us. She is a faith representative. She's actually the UN representative at the UN of the Soka Gakkai International Organization, a Buddhist organization focusing on peace and respect, peace between people and between people and nature as well. And then we have also, we don't have Marlene with us, not yet, maybe we'll arrive later. So this is the panel for today. Patricia, I will start with you. You're heading an organization that is probably one of the most effective in connecting local action to global change, because you're leading grassroots organizations around the world, coordinated. What is your message in terms of how this local action can really begin to inspire change at a global level?
Thank you, Marco. For those of you who don't know what BirdLife is, we are a 100-year-old organization that brings together 117 local conservation organizations around the world. So we are the largest partnership for nature of civil society organizations. Why does it matter that we have this local action? Because it can be a proof of the pudding. It's a proof that it's actually possible, that actually the minute that you empower and enable these local actors, they can make a huge difference. And we were hearing from Lucy when we were talking about indigenous people, is exactly the same thing. These local organizations that understand their local backyard, their local countries, their local reality, make a huge difference in terms of action. And if we can bring that together, like BirdLife does, we can actually showcase how we can have global impact. So part of my ranting earlier this morning was, we keep talking about we have to do this, we have to do this. We're doing that a lot. So how can we take on all of those fantastic experiences, package them and showcase that it's actually possible. It is happening. It's not that dream that is so far away that we're not going to be able to achieve, that we really can make things happen, and they are happening already. We just need to scale them up and bring the other actors, as I said at the beginning, private sector, the finance sector, the governments, the indigenous people, the local communities, the local civil society, because we are on this together. This is our common home.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. Tina, the gender agenda in the biodiversity discourse. We know that that's a super important dimension. Where are we with that?
Yes,
honestly.
So thank you, Marco. So first of all, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to be loud. I do speak fast, so do let me know if I go too fast. So I'm really happy to be here and to also see the focus on biodiversity, which is very small at this climate conference, where it should be at the heart of the discussion. There is a Biodiversity Day. I don't know how many of you actually know about it, parallelly going here, being organized by the government of Egypt, the CBD Secretariat, and the UNEP. Why I'm pointing out is that we are having a discussion on the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is going to be adopted literally 3 weeks from now in Montreal, coming soon, right? And what we are discussing around here is so relevant. Either the discussions are going to be impacted, or some of the discussions that are ongoing and not yet negotiated, the goals and targets, and the indicators for the Global Biodiversity Framework, versus what could possibly, good, bad, evil, not good, from this discussion going and influencing the discussions of the post-2020 in Montreal. So first thing that. So I think embedding the discussion around biodiversity is really very important, not only for private sector, but it's got to do with the rights holders. You know, I think why is it important? You know, we are talking about environmental justice. I'm not talking about climate justice. We're talking about environmental justice. You know, you saw the first slide. You know, you talked about the data on climate change and the biodiversity. We forgot one more line there, is land use change. Marcus talked, I think, talked about also the Kunming Declaration. The Kunming Declaration is also now going up as the Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration. And as you know, that what's going to happen at COP15 in Montreal is the second part of the COP. The COP already began a year and a half ago in Kunming, China. Right? So it's very important for us to see what discussion, especially from here on the nature-based solution, actually impacts. Because for me, I will ask you this. What example would you give me of a nature-based solution? Like what could be a possibly approach or a pathway? Think about it. For me, it needs to be embedded in social, economic, cultural rights. Unless and until you have a human rights approach, a rights-based approach for the indigenous peoples and local communities, recognizing the traditional knowledge. Sorry, I'm taking a little bit of time because I think the graph, you showed the data, I'm impounding, I'm using that. Saying that they are the people who are conserving and contributing, but when you're talking about prioritizing, where people see the prioritization has to happen is seen as businesses or government-led, right, state-led. And I think there's a bit of that needs to be changed, right? Because you're talking about it that NBS, for us, is going to be very rooted of how it's going to be operationalized. Because I want to ask you, like, what is your idea of NBS, like I said, because the vision, the term NBS is still ambiguous, right? It looks really very nice. And I still try to put people's attention to biodiversity. As a common person, you talk about nature, and in the questionnaire, if you start, maybe you should put a question, not nature, but biodiversity, because nature is pristine, right? It's like a protected area, it's really nice, pristine lakes. When you talk about biodiversity, you talk about the relationship that nature has with the species, with the people. And that's also the reason why when you talk about NBS, or not to talk about NBS, any solution, just an equitable solution, it's really important that you also have the rights holders, including women, and they are heard in these negotiations, and to ensure that these solutions don't become false solutions, but rather are just. And how do you really make it is a question I want to propose to you, because all of you are in the negotiations. We say something here, but eventually it's the parties that kind of get things done at the plenaries.
Thank you, Tina. Inclusion, equity, justice, inseparable from the conservation and nature agenda. And then I think we're going to go back to your question in a minute. Alexandra.
Yes,
faith and nature. No. Go ahead. The link, the contribution.
Yes, thank you very much. I was jumping on what you both shared earlier, and thank you, Marco. Faith is encompassing so many realities and diverse groups. So what's interesting is that several faith groups have been increasingly following both the climate processes and now the biodiversity process with a keen eye on where the interconnectedness, there are different ways to express the web of life, but to really create the blueprint, a blueprint for really the narrative of respecting the dignity of life and people in a relationship, as you were mentioning, Tina. So with this eye and this grounding, there has been an increasing engagement, looking at the advocacy. And I would say from a multi-faith perspective, the engagement has grown and grown and grown. And so we have been really trying to see from an advocacy perspective in the context of this GBF. So what, from a faith perspective, are the points that we really want to call for? And we realize that we are actually, and many parts of the faith communities are actually women, men, children and youth, people who are from local communities, also even indigenous people. So we realize we actually really want to stand in solidarity with many of the asks from other constituencies and groups. So for instance, we definitely support gender targets in the GBF. We also really hope and call for very strong, equitable and rights-based targets, because I think that one of the learning now is that indeed if we separate, we will not achieve anything, and we did that in the past with the Aichi targets. So now it's really a good learning moment for us to be able to really ground that in respect of the rights of the people, so that it can really be a mutually flourishing relationship. Yes, I think like at this point, the last point is that we also really support the vision of the youth and the children and youth constituency, and they have also calls for intergenerational equity and transformative education. So these are also calls that, as much as we can, as various faith representatives, we will also amplify and bring forward.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I suggest now we get some maybe comments or questions from the audience here, and see perhaps for a second round of comments. Lucy, feel free to come in as well, because you had only one shot with one comment, so feel free to come in with additional comments as well. Anybody wants to make a comment on this based on what you heard earlier and also now? Patrick, introduce yourself.
Patrick again from the Global Commons Alliance. On the faith-based organization, can you be more specific how to increase the involvement and work with faith-based organizations?
Yes, thank you very much. So the involvement started from more than 3 years ago. Actually also supported by really the WWF in really supporting faith actors to actually understand where the GBF process was going, because that was very external in a way, and linking it with practices of the local faith communities, and seeing how actually many faith communities, faith as any group is also part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So how some practices were really opportunities to use the land that they are in some churches, in temples, to really how they are actually already protecting, conserving biodiversity, or how they could increase. So from that engagement and perspective and awareness raising, more and more faith groups representatives came together and are coming together in a multi-faith now advocacy group that focuses on, and I think it's it's between 20 and 30 faith groups that are actively joining the advocacy part. Many others are doing a lot of activities on the ground and maybe not interested in joining the advocacy, but the number of representatives who are interested in bringing also principles of agroecology and making sure that these are also, for instance, part of the GBF has been growing. And it is not a formal caucus, it is not a formal group, but it's definitely a dynamic informal gathering facilitating the engagement in the GBF. So there will be several representatives in Montreal as they were in the previous sessions of the negotiations.
Thank you. I think one special comment, just listening to all of you. I think it's very important that working collectively together should be one of the key points that is really that we have to carry forward with us. Because, for example, if you talk about the women constituency, talk about the faith constituency, which is very important, because for us indigenous people who live in remote areas, they depend and listen to the religious leaders, whatever they say. So everyone has a role to play. And looking at the Global Biodiversity Framework, I think it's a very important point. From now, even if it's just a few weeks to Montreal, we still can make some difference by talking to our partners and really making to push the way forward. Because it's there. It's something that if we don't act now, then it will be something different. The nature positive way we are discussing issues is very, very important, because it's a high time even the private sector, and I wish there was a private sector here to tell us exactly, maybe I missed out in the first part, but it's very important for everyone to tell us how do they feel about this global framework. You know, before I think we also made mistakes in negotiating without other key players within our on looking at nature and so on. So it's important now we are doing everything at the same time, which I think is very important for us to be able to really move forward. And as indigenous people, we are really looking forward that even the framework, when it's done, we can continue partnering, because partnership is important, and we can move forward in terms of looking at securing our, climate natural and nature positive world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Haitsa Susan Wasubire from Climate Action Network, Uganda. Looking at the topic that you're discussing, I have a concern that many times when we're talking about the approaches to save nature and the responses, most emphasis is put on the ecosystems, but very little emphasis is put on the ecosystem services. And this is the extension of the ecosystem. So in my opinion, very little is put in regards to the ecosystem services themselves, which are at the end point, as well as the governance. I think that it's very important that emphasis should be put also on the ecosystem services themselves, and deliberate effort be made to ensure the sustainability of ecosystem services. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rob Cameron from Nestle, and I just wanted to answer the point about the private sector that you raised. Just so I know, are there any other private sector representatives with us? Just one. Okay, well, maybe I'll speak for both of us. I just want to say that when it comes to biodiversity, we are very, very strong supporters of the Make It Mandatory campaign, and we are strong supporters of a good outcome when it comes to the upcoming CBD in Montreal. For us, we know that our whole future as a company depends upon nature. We can't provide the ingredients that we need or source the ingredients that we need without agriculture. And agriculture, of course, is nature. One thing we forget repeatedly is that the economy of which we're a part is a subsystem of the ecosystem. There is no economy apart from the ecosystem. It is embedded within it. And so we need to take care of the ecosystem, and that's why the biodiversity framework is so important. We are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature.
Thank you. Let me just check if there is any other comment before I hand it over again to the panel to react. But I really want to thank you for the inputs that you made, and because your point on the business alignment It's super important, and I'm gonna make a reflection about that later. By the way, in 5 minutes we should have the executive secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity joining us. So that will be an interesting intervention from her about how she sees Montreal evolving. Now, I'm going to ask the panel to reflect on what you heard from the comments. Who wants to start? Okay, Patricia.
So, a couple of quick things. I think, Lucy, you were absolutely right that we do need to work together. And I think one of the, Marco has heard me say this multiple times, I think one of the biggest failures of the conservation community is that we continue to compete with each other instead of realizing that we're on this together. And that's why I love so much this pavilion, because for the first time in many years we have come together as one compact that is actually advocating for nature positive, carbon neutral. Now, going back to the point of private sector, and you're absolutely right, and I think we keep forgetting that half of the GDP depends on nature. Now, we have to be careful about how we position that, because yes, we need nature for our economy, for our subsistence, for our growth, but we also need to realize that things like agriculture are one of the biggest threats to nature right now, and unless we change and shift the way that we're growing our food, the way that we are producing our things, the way that we're consuming things, we're not going to be able to make that shift that nature needs right now. And the advantage and the message that we keep not saying is that by making those shifts, we are actually gaining. It's not a cost. It's not a cost for businesses, it's not a cost to society, it's actually an investment that is going to help us survive in this planet in the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. We are 8 billion right now, or yesterday. We're more than 8 billion right now. And we do need to make sure that we're starting to shift this paradigm. Remember that nature needs to be at the heart, that we work together, that this is an investment for now, not for like 50 years from now, and that we can make it happen because there's already examples that we need to bring together, scale up, and make them shine.
And that's another part of the paradox that I was mentioning before. On one hand, we need nature for our economy, on the other hand, our economy is degrading nature, and so that can obviously not go on. And we'll discuss, by the way, the shift you're mentioning, Patricia, we're calling those shifts nature-positive transitions. So transitions to practices that are actually sustainable and deliver more nature, not less. That's actually possible. Agriculture can support restoration of pollinators, of water courses, of a lot of other biodiversity in the farmland. Tina, any reflection on what you heard?
A long one or a short one?
Medium one, because but
Yeah.
Elizabeth actually is coming soon. So
no, I think one important thing again I see directing the focus, right? I do understand the visioning of NBS, but NBS is not only to mitigate carbon. Why are we only talking about carbon neutral, carbon whatever, positive neutral? So it's all about carbon sequestration and carbon. Why don't we say that NBS for addressing drivers of biodiversity loss? That's the equation what I'm talking about is missing, right? You talk about, everybody's talking about the way nature has got ecosystem functions and services, right? Services and functions are different. You're talking about carbon, and the other hand, you have their contribution to the continuation of traditional knowledge, say for example. Right, that is also an intrinsic value of nature that contributes to the, half of the people's population, including women. So that's my whole thing, is saying that we really need to shift that thing that biodiversity should not be an unintended consequence for carbon sequestration or carbon credits or carbon storage. Nature needs to be taken care of because of its intrinsic value to our well-being. That's what CBD is about. we talk about how the biodiversity contributes to living in harmony with nature. And you cannot live in harmony with nature if you violate half of the people's population's right. On the GBF in particular, we are talking about these very aspirational things, right? Now, specific on the targets, on what's going to be operationalizing on the GBF, say for example, is target 15. Target 15 implies the mainstreaming of biodiversity into sectors. Those sectors are agriculture, tourism, mining, energy. Like, you know, there are 8 of them. So it is wonderful to see the movement and the interest of business sectors to say that, you know, we agree on it, we really want to do this. But why are we then short of giving access to information, right? Why would they be short of embedding due diligence? I mean, if there is this thing of that we really want to contribute, then there has to be those systems in place. And I think the earlier panel talked about it, accountability. Unless you have accountability embedded into it, then reporting is just for namesake. So those are the things that needs to be embedded very concretely in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Otherwise, it's aspirational. It will depend on what you think about NBS. Like I said, think about it. What you think about what NBS is, what I think about NBS is, what a youth think what NBS is, what indigenous people think what NBS is, and is different. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Alexandra.
Thank you very much. So maybe just on the point on your very good point, Lucy. Yes, I think that it's key. In some other areas here in the climate negotiations, we have had it's on small agenda item, but we have had on action for climate empowerment that relates on to access to information, public participation, etc. It's a small agenda item, but across constituencies and group, for 1 year, we've been really building a good understanding of each other, youth, human rights, various groups really engaged to make an action plan solid. Well, the action plan, we don't know to what extent it's really strong. However, we really did see that when we came together, creating a true solidarity, we did reach having an important grounding of this action plan in recognition that this is grounded in human rights. And so from what I can just say is that from the multi-faith facilitating group, or at least we are absolutely committed to really support and amplify the voices that you have mentioned.
Tina, what you mentioned about the nature-based solutions is interesting because obviously nature-based solutions can be applied to so many of the social challenges that we're facing. And by the way, I completely agree that there is also an important element which is not just about the services of nature, but also the intrinsic value of nature per se. And our duty to coexist with nature as a matter of ethical duty. But nature-based solutions is a helpful concept in order to really highlight the material and spiritual and cultural benefits that nature provides to us that frankly we've been taking for granted for so long. And now it's time to actually begin to focus on those and understand what we're going to miss and what the consequences will be of losing those services. That's why the lady comment about ecosystem services is important, because it's not just about protecting the forest that you see in front of you, it's about protecting the services that the forest provide to us every day for free. We never receive the bill from a forest or from a bee or from a fish in the ocean. Right now, it's just not valued enough, and I think we're getting in a space where actually we're beginning to put the right value on what nature offers to us. But we have another comment, a question that will help us wait for Elizabeth. Don't go, because Elizabeth is going to tell us something groundbreaking.
Good afternoon. So my name is Robert Spencer. I'm here for FIDIC, which is the Federation for Infrastructure Engineering Consultancy, but also I work for AECOM, so another private sector viewpoint. I was just thinking about the point about ecosystem services, and also your point about whether we're missing something in the sort of philosophical construct about how we approach valuation and solutions. And I was reflecting on the fact, 'cause I've been involved in this sort of topic for a long time, that when the sort of original concepts of ecosystem services were sort of being developed, 15, 20 years ago now, you had the concept of natural stocks, and then stocks of assets, so stocks of natural assets, and then services flowing from those. And I think in many parts of the world, we've lost one of the intrinsic ingredients of the full richness and value of those natural asset stocks, which is indigenous stewardship of those assets. And so instead of perhaps getting hung up on the idea of how do we think about indigenous knowledge in the concept of ecosystem services, actually in my mind, and this may be an erroneous thought process, the indigenous knowledge is actually tied up in the natural capital stock, and it needs to be valued there, and the stewards of that natural capital stock need to be included in the decision making around the valuation and in the decision making around the ongoing management. And so in many parts of the world we've lost that ingredient, but notably in those areas where we still do have vibrant indigenous populations, we always have the richest biodiversity and the richest natural capital assets. So I think the indigenous knowledge is actually an asset and should be thought of in that way rather than as a service flowing from it. It's intrinsically linked to the existence and continued flourishing of the asset.
Very interesting point. Thank you very much for that comment. I'm very pleased to introduce you now to Elizabeth Mrema. Elizabeth is the Executive Secretary. Yeah, please. Thank you so much for applause for the panel, please, because they made some really great points. Thank you so much. So Elizabeth is the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Busy time, Elizabeth, for you. Busy time for everybody, and also a little bit, as usual in these big processes with a lot of perspectives from all corners of the world. How many countries the CBD Convention is signatories?
196.
196 countries. It's not an easy job to bring together 196 countries around a big commitment on a topic which is complex but also so important. Today, this event, Elizabeth, was about highlighting the support of civil society, non-state actors, but actually we had representatives of governments as well, business, they're still here with us, and online, and it seems that society is actually ready to embrace a big, ambitious commitment and a plan, because commitment are not enough, and a plan to deliver what we say nature positive, halt and reverse nature laws. Where are we with that? Can we really be hopeful in terms of agreeing something like that in Montreal, considering society is asking for it? The hot potato to you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Good afternoon, all. My pleasure to be here. We need to be hopeful and delighted that the non-state actors are really pushing governments. And I think the push has taken the negotiators where they are. Probably if not for the push of non-state actors, I'm not sure if we would have been where we are. And why am I saying so? This is the first time in the history of the Convention on Biological Diversity that we see stakeholders really engaged. It has never happened before. And that explains also the reason why, probably part of the reason why we did not reach any of the Haiti biodiversity targets is that not all stakeholders were engaged. And there was that assumption that, yes, the targets have been adopted, it's the responsibility of the governments to make sure they are achieved. While we know also biodiversity is a cross-cutting issue. It cannot be left with the government. We know indigenous peoples, local communities conserve over 80% of our land area, much as they are less than 5% global or 32% global. So clearly that cannot just be the government. We have learned that lesson, but also we know the recent events have enabled all the stakeholders to come on board, in the sense that we all suffer from the loss of biodiversity. If biodiversity is the foundation of life, it is the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the carbon storage we need. So without it, there's no life. So I think that awareness and understanding has brought everybody on board. And of course, the World Economic Forum has even told us that there is a business case there, where $44 trillion per year accrue from biodiversity, or 50% dependent on nature. GDP is dependent on nature. 395 million jobs by 2030. So there is there are benefits there. We need it for our own lives, for our livelihood, but also for the business. It is important. So all this, and furthermore, I think, is not just the importance of biodiversity on its own, but making connection between biodiversity and other challenges, be it land degradation, pollution, climate change. All these are connected. I mean, we are here at the climate COP. Without biodiversity, climate change solutions will not be achieved. And without climate change solutions be achieved, we cannot reverse and halt biodiversity loss. So you can see each is dependent on the other. And we need to begin looking at things in an integrated fashion. So it's all this understanding and awareness that has also brought an increasing positive pressure from the non-state actors into the negotiations of the post-2020. It's delightful, for instance, to see the business community, the financial institutions, actually now calling on governments to make sure that the draft target 15 on disclosure or assessing the impacts of the activities on nature, that governments make it mandatory. Who would have expected this 10 years ago? Again, we see private sector pushing governments to take action, showing clearly that they are ready. Indigenous people, local communities, they are ready to continue to conserve the areas they have traditionally do, and their culture and traditional knowledge has facilitated that. But they want to be assured that their rights are equally protected, that the land rights, their culture. So everybody had something to benefit. And the pressure is increasing on the governments to take action. But of course, governments will need to put in place the policies and the regulations, the enabling environment for all the stakeholders to be able to also contribute. So the post-2020 will not be for governments, as it was thought for the Aichi biodiversity targets, but for all of us, you and me. And I think we need to begin with ourselves. What am I doing around me, which is positive for biodiversity, positive for climate, before I can begin pointing finger, either on indigenous people, on private sector, or on macro. We begin with ourselves. And when we begin with ourselves, we begin also with our children and grandchildren and the youth, because these are the leaders of tomorrow. We have polluted the world. 97% of the globe is degraded because of our human activities, human action. So we are, all of us here, we have contributed to the terrible state we are today. And that's why then we need to bring the youth with us, our children with us, because the actions taken today, they are the ones to implement tomorrow. And if they are not on the negotiation table today, how can we expect them to make any changes in future when most of us either would have been gone or have retired, as the case may be. So yes, Marco, we appreciate the pressure from the non-state actors. Clearly, the governments are listening. They've heard, they've listened. Not surprising that all stakeholders can already see themselves in the draft framework as it stands. Be it the private sector, be it the civil society, the women, the youth, virtually everybody can see. Not only that, the co-chairs went out of the way and thank for the extended period we had during the lockdown to consult all stakeholders. I would really be surprised if there is a group which had not been reached out during the negotiations to be listened so that their contributions, they are also there. But yes, Montreal may end up with just a document. That will be nothing if it will not be translated into actions on the ground. And that's where all of us will come in, and particularly the state actors. You are the ones on the ground to take actions, to implement, to continue to put pressure on the government to create that enabling environment for you to take action. So let us think beyond Montreal, beyond for implementation. We don't want to come back in 2030 and go back to where we are today. Scientists have told us we only have this one planet. There's no planet B. This is our last chance. So if we miss this time, it means we are saying we have nothing to leave for our children and grandchildren. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. First of all, I think we should thank Elizabeth for making the time to come and stay with us. Your agenda, I can't even imagine how brutal it is, so thank you very much for being with us. And it's not the first time, so thank you again and again. Thank you also for recognizing the role of non-state actors, and you're absolutely right, I agree with you. I've never seen mobilization of civil society, business, like we have seen around the biodiversity discussion leading to Montreal. And you're right, Montreal will deliver a document, but that document is so important because it's going to help us align everybody and galvanize everybody and finally give a positive sign that the leaders of the world, as you say, and I hope you're right, are listening. So Elizabeth, thank you, good luck, we'll be here to support you, and be sure that the non-state actors will stick together and support, hopefully, a powerful outcome in Montreal. Thank you very much, everybody, for staying with us. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's have a speaker photo.